Dead America. Boise Part 2 by Derek Slayton. Chapter 1. Sergeant Copeland paced back and forth inside the office area of the warehouse, wrapping up his conversation with Kowalski. "Will do, Sarge. Good luck, and hope you find something," Kowalski said. "You and me both," Copeland replied as he clicked off his communicator. He walked out of the office and into the main section of the warehouse, where Privates Johnson and Baker were already looking through boxes. "Give me some good news, boys," Copeland said, his voice echoing slightly in the large, open space. "Nothing of particular interest so far, Sarge," Johnson responded, glancing up from the box he was inspecting. "So nothing usable?" Copeland asked, a hint of frustration in his tone. "Oh, don't get me wrong. It's plenty usable," Johnson clarified. "It's just not what we're looking for. These 5 stacks of boxes here are all camping gear. I'm not saying we need to be carrying it all out with us, although I wouldn't say no to some of the camping stoves. Can't have too much hot food." "Yeah, no kidding," Copeland muttered. "Go ahead and work up about a quarter of the way and come back on this side." "You got it, Sarge," Johnson replied, already shifting to the next box. Copeland walked away from Johnson, moving over to the next aisle, where he spotted Baker munching away on something as he ripped open the cardboard box in front of him. "I hope you saved some for me there, Baker," Copeland called out, his voice startling the younger soldier. Baker flinched, nearly dropping the snack he was holding. "Damn, Sarge, you're going to give me a heart attack." "So will that snack cake if you eat enough of them," Copeland quipped. Baker chuckled, then motioned to the top of a nearby box. Sitting atop it was a freshly opened box of snack cakes, conspicuously missing 2 treats. "Help yourself, they're still surprisingly fresh." "I think I'm all right, Baker," Copeland replied, shaking his head slightly. "It's got chocolate cream in the middle," Baker tempted. Copeland paused, contemplating for a moment before cracking a smile and grabbing a couple out of the box. Before opening his, he yelled out toward the other aisle, "Hey Johnson, coming in hot." He tossed one of the snack cakes over the wall of boxes in front of him. The sound of crinkly plastic echoed through the warehouse as Johnson caught it. "I appreciate it, Sarge." Johnson's voice called back, muffled by the distance. "So, Baker, have you found anything of value over here, besides a 5th grader's lunch?" Copeland asked, returning his attention to Baker. "Nothing yet, Copeland," Baker said, his tone slightly resigned. "The next box up from you is stuffed full of winter jackets. This one is blankets, and if the labeling is correct, the next one up here is filled with kerosene heaters. All useful stuff if you're trying to keep a large population alive during the winter. But not so useful when it comes to making bullets," Copeland observed. "I'm afraid not," Baker admitted. "Get a quarter of the way up and clear the other side." "I'm going to start checking the boxes on the bay side," Copeland instructed. Baker nodded as Copeland opened up his snack cake, shoving half of it into his mouth in a single bite. He mumbled to himself, savoring the treat, while walking over to his first box to investigate. "Okay, tell me you have something good for me," Copeland said as he approached the box. He shoved the rest of the snack cake into his mouth and drew his knife, slicing open the cardboard to reveal the contents inside. Copeland let out a sigh as he saw packages of dry pasta inside. "Well, at least we don't have to worry about going hungry," he muttered. Before he could move on to the next box, his communicator clicked on, with Kowalski speaking in a serious, almost panicked tone. "Sarge, I need to know exactly where you are." "What are you talking about, Kowalski?" Copeland asked, his brow furrowing. "Just tell me," Kowalski insisted, his voice unusually stern. The tone caught Copeland off guard, causing him to snap into the moment and take the request seriously. "We're on the far end of the building to your right. Now tell me what in the hell is going on." "I think we have trouble," Kowalski said, his voice low and tense. "What kind of trouble?" Copeland asked, his heart rate quickening as he listened intently for the response, but only got static in return. "Kowalski. Kowalski. Can you hear me?" Copeland's voice grew more urgent as he tried to re-establish the connection. Nothing but static filled his ear. "Damn it, this isn't good," he cursed under his breath. Copeland slung his rifle off his shoulder, getting it ready before running over to the others. "Baker, Johnson, we got trouble," he called out as he approached. Both privates dropped what they were doing and rushed over to the sergeant, getting their weapons ready. "What is it?" Baker asked, his voice tinged with concern. "I don't know exactly," Copeland admitted. "Kowalski just radioed in saying that there was trouble." "He could just be overreacting," Johnson suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. "I don't think so," Copeland replied, shaking his head. "Before I could get details, our signal got jammed." "The militia?" Baker asked, his eyes widening slightly. "That would be my guess," Copeland confirmed, his jaw tightening. "I can get up top, see if I can spot them," Johnson offered, already scanning the area for a way to climb. "No, it's too dangerous," Copeland countered quickly. "If the militia is converging on us, they're going to have snipers." "Then what do we do?" Baker asked, his voice steady but anxious. Copeland contemplated for a moment, looking back and forth between the bay doors and the loads of unchecked boxes. "Militia or not, we still have a mission. While I keep watch at the door, I want you to spot check the boxes. Every third one, rip it open, and see if there is anything related to bullet making." "But Sarge," Johnson started to protest, but Copeland cut him off. "Do it now," Copeland ordered, not raising his voice but speaking sternly, with a hint of fear that both privates recognized immediately. They nodded and ran off to do as ordered. Copeland rushed over to the bay doors, making sure to stay away from the windows on them. Before he reached the wall, he heard a gunshot go off in the distance, putting him on edge. The sergeant picked up the pace, planting his back against the wall and looking out the window from the side. As he got a lay of the land, more gunshots echoed in the distance, but he didn't see any militiamen. "Somebody's taking shots at Kowalski," Copeland muttered, his concern deepening. Even though he knew he was unlikely to get a response, he clicked on his communicator. "Kowalski, do you copy?" Nothing but static filled his ear. "You better be safe, Kowalski." "If you let another sniper take you out, I'll never let you live it down," Copeland grumbled, trying to keep his worries at bay. He did his best to put Kowalski out of his mind as he made his way down the exterior walls toward the bay door that was still partially open. The sergeant wasn't within 20 yards of the door when he realized something was horribly wrong. Several arms flailed about, stretching over the threshold and reaching for the corpses of the chosen on the ground that were just out of reach. Copeland approached cautiously, not wanting to draw their attention, but despite his best efforts, a couple of ghouls noticed him. Their moans grew excited, the creatures shoving their comrades out of the way to move down the line and get closer to the sergeant. This caused the other zombies pressed up against the opening to look in his direction. "Well, so much for stealth," Copeland muttered, taking a few steps back. He stopped a few feet shy of the opening, still well out of reach of the creatures, taking a knee so that he could look out into the street between the warehouses. "Now what in the hell do we have here?" Copeland's gaze fell on the bay door with the ramp at the corner of the building, a good 70 yards from where he was. Dozens of zombies, possibly approaching 100, were lined up on the ramp, trying to push their way through the doors. "Something is definitely not right here," Copeland observed, a sense of dread creeping over him. He moved away from the wall, preparing to dart across the opening when gunfire erupted from the warehouse across the street. "Kowalski," Copeland whispered, his grip tightening on his rifle. He paused, listening carefully to the gun battle being waged across the way, trying to get a read on exactly where the shots were coming from. Once he realized they were moving from his right to left, he darted across the open bay door. Copeland slid to the ground, flipping over onto his stomach and prepping his assault rifle. He tracked the gunshots as they moved across the warehouse toward the corner of the building. Without warning, the door flung open and Kowalski burst out into the street, straight into a zombie. Copeland tensed up, trying to line up a shot, but not able to get a clean look at the zombies Kowalski was dealing with. He relaxed once he watched his sniper break away from the pack and put some distance between himself and the warehouse. "Please be dumb enough to show yourself." "Please," Copeland muttered under his breath, aiming his weapon toward the door. He didn't have to wait long. Copeland popped off several rounds as soon as the door began opening, his aim off ever so slightly, the bullets smacking into the wall of the building rather than the gunman. He heard more shots going off in the distance, assuming that it was Kowalski also popping off covering fire. Copeland kept his aim trained on the door, making sure that the militia wasn't going to follow Kowalski. He cracked a smile when he saw the zombies just outside their door begin shambling toward the other warehouse. The militiamen fired a few shots into the mob, trying to get the door shut, but it was to no avail. They continued to struggle, firing several more bullets into the mob. "Tear them up, boys," Copeland whispered with grim satisfaction. He got up from his position, yelling out into the warehouse, "Johnson, Baker, where are you?" Close to the ramp door. Baker's voice echoed back. Copeland pulled himself off the ground and began running through the warehouse, eventually finding an aisle where he could cross over. Within seconds, he spotted Baker and Johnson, who were ripping open different boxes in a frustrated manner. "Son of a bitch." Johnson cursed, kicking a box before taking a moment to compose himself. "I take it that you boys haven't found anything?" Copeland asked, though he already knew the answer. "Not a damn thing, Sarge," Johnson replied, shaking his head in frustration. "It's like these assholes just raided supercenters and called it a day," Baker added, his tone equally irritated. "Nothing but warm clothes and non-perishable foods." "If they cleaned out the other factories, they didn't bring that stuff here," Johnson speculated. "It could be in another warehouse," Baker suggested, though even he didn't sound convinced. "One that they left unguarded?" "Unlikely," Johnson countered. "It doesn't matter, at least not at the moment," Copeland interjected. "The militia is tied up for the moment, but I don't think it's going to stay that way," Copeland finished. "Is that what all the gunfire was about?" Baker asked, his expression turning serious. "Yeah, they were taking some shots at Kowalski, but I got them pinned down across the street with the help of our undead friends out there," Copeland explained, glancing toward the bay doors, as if expecting more trouble to erupt at any moment. "So what are we doing, Sarge? Are we staying and fighting them?" Johnson asked, his voice betraying a mixture of eagerness and anxiety. "To hell with that. If they want this place, they can have it," Baker said firmly, shaking his head. "Hell no. I'll defend those snack cakes with my life," Johnson joked, trying to lighten the tension. "Baker's right," Copeland said, ignoring Johnson's attempt at humor. "There's nothing for us here, and certainly nothing worth dying for." "There's bound to be a fire exit on the other side of the building," Baker suggested, already looking in that direction. "Good, let's find it and sneak out before," Copeland began, but his thought was abruptly cut off as a deafening explosion rocked the building. The blast, not more than 30 yards from their position, knocked them all to the ground, their ears ringing from the shockwave. The only thing that spared their lives were the stacks of boxes between them and the detonation. Copeland rolled on the ground for a moment, disoriented, as the high-pitched ringing in his ears gradually began to subside. "Sarge. Sarge. Are you okay?" Johnson's voice pierced through the lingering haze, his face appearing above Copeland as he grabbed him by the shirt with both hands and yanked him up off the ground. "We have to move. We have to move," Johnson urged, his voice filled with panic. Copeland was still out of it, struggling to make sense of what Johnson was saying. However, the urgency in his tone spurred him into action, and he began moving with Johnson away from the source of the explosion. As they stumbled away from the blast site, Copeland caught a glimpse of the bay door, or rather, what was left of it. The explosion had blown it clean off its hinges, leaving a gaping hole in the side of the warehouse. Daylight poured in through the opening, along with dozens of zombies, drawn by the noise and the promise of fresh prey. Chapter 2. Johnson continued to yell at Sergeant Copeland, hoping to shock him out of his daze. "Sarge, I need you to get your ass moving," he shouted, his voice laced with urgency. Copeland let out a grunt, as if he was trying to will the fog out of his brain. The gunshots popping off just a few yards away helped snap him back to the moment. The sergeant looked over to see Baker squeezing off round after round in an attempt to stem the tide of zombies pouring in through the blown open bay door. "Sarge," Johnson called again. "I'm with you, Johnson. Come on," Copeland responded, his voice now steady as he began moving down the aisle away from the zombie mob. Johnson rushed over to Baker, giving him a forceful smack on the arm to get his attention. The two privates quickly joined Copeland, rushing down the aisle just behind him. The three of them continued moving at a rapid pace, only stopping when they were a good 50 yards away from the zombies. Looking back, they spotted a few dozen of the ghouls shambling in their direction, while others were wandering over to the back aisle. "Are you two okay?" Johnson asked. Baker let out an angry grunt as he popped a fresh magazine into his rifle. "I'll take that as a yes, Sarge," Johnson continued. "Yeah, my ears are ringing, but I'll manage," Copeland replied, shaking his head slightly as if to clear the noise. "So what in the hell do we do?" Johnson asked, his frustration starting to show. "The plan hasn't changed. We get back to the fire escape and get the hell out of here," Copeland said firmly. Both Johnson and Baker nodded, and the trio began walking towards the back wall. They knew that time was of the essence, but they were still feeling the effects of the blast and needed time to recover. The trio reached the back wall, all three of them readying their rifles as they paused outside the fire escape door. "Okay, we get out this door and move quick to the right. The last time I saw Kowalski, he was moving in that direction, so that's the way we're going to," Copeland explained, his voice steady. "Going to where, though?" Baker asked. Copeland hesitated before responding, running through the possible destinations in his mind. After several seconds, he let out a sigh, knowing that none of them were particularly ideal. "If we can make it, let's get up to the factory," he finally said. "That's a hell of a haul," Johnson remarked. "I know, but it's a lot bigger than any of these warehouses, so even if we're outgunned, we'll at least have a fighting chance," Copeland replied. The two privates nodded in agreement as Copeland did one last check of his rifle before motioning towards the door. "Let's do this," he said. Copeland placed his hand on the release bar of the fire escape door, pausing for a second before pushing it open. The door moved no more than 6 inches before gunfire erupted outside. Copeland fell backwards to the ground as the bullets pinged off the metal door, slamming it back shut. Baker reached down, grabbing Copeland by the arm and yanking him up. "Jesus, Sarge, are you okay?" Baker asked, concern in his voice. "Yeah, just pissed," Copeland grumbled as he got to his feet. Johnson moved to the side of the door, hitting the release again and pushing it open ever so slightly. Once again, a torrent of bullets smacked up against it. "What in the hell did you do that for?" Baker demanded. "The more they shoot, the more attention they draw to themselves," Johnson replied. Baker begrudgingly nodded, realizing that Johnson had a point. "Could either of you tell where the shots were coming from?" he asked. "There's another warehouse behind us, so they're probably set up at the bay doors," Copeland speculated. Baker looked along the back wall of the warehouse, seeing nothing but stacked boxes and concrete, with some movement in the aisle 100 yards away. He studied the shambling zombies for a moment, trying to get a read on how fast they were moving. "I figure we have 2 minutes before those things are on us," he said, his voice calm despite the situation. "So let's try a different exit," Johnson said. "Great idea, Johnson. Which one do you want to try? The one in the office, which they undoubtedly have covered? Or do you want to try your hand at the bay doors, where a few hundred of those things are waiting for us?" Baker shot back, his frustration evident. "Either one sounds like a better option than this one," Johnson retorted. "I'm not so sure. If one of us gets prone and somebody else pushes the door open, I figure we'll have a second or two to squeeze off a shot before they spot us," Baker mused, thinking aloud. "At which point you're dead, because there's definitely more than one shooter across the way," Johnson said. "Then we try the offices," Baker suggested. "It's the same choke point," Johnson pointed out. "Yeah, but there are windows facing the warehouse next door, so we can lay down some covering fire. Plus, there aren't any bay doors on the next building facing this direction," Baker explained, trying to bolster his argument. "Which I'm sure they've thought of," Johnson said, a hint of sarcasm in his tone. "If they know they can't watch a door, they'll either have sniper coverage or they rig the door. Or both." Baker thought about it for a moment before letting out a frustrated yell, knowing that Johnson was right. All the while, Copeland remained quiet, contemplating their next move. "We're going out through the bay doors," Copeland finally decided. Both Johnson and Baker turned towards Copeland with confused looks. "Are you serious, Sarge?" Baker asked. "They're not going to be expecting it." "That's for sure," Copeland replied, a hint of a grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Oh, what the hell? Let's do it," Johnson said with a resigned shrug. Baker let out a sigh before nodding to Copeland. "Okay then, let's move," Copeland ordered. The squad turned away from the fire escape door, but not before Johnson gave it one more push open, which again drew gunfire coming from across the street. The trio rushed across the exterior wall of the building, moving past the offices while glancing up the center aisle. Nearly 100 zombies were shambling towards them, closing the gap to within 50 yards. Copeland reached the bay doors first, looking up the row towards the open one, which was still jam-packed with creatures reaching over the threshold. 10 yards past the door was the front edge of the horde of interior ghouls, drawn to the noise their comrades were making. "Well, we ain't getting out that way," Johnson said. Copeland didn't panic, instead positioning himself so that he could look out through the crack between the bay door and the wall. The warehouse across the street still had all the bay doors closed, at least the ones he could see. Copeland moved to his right so that he could see the fire escape door to the left on the adjacent building. He let a small smile escape his lips when he saw that it was wide open and zombies were shambling inside. "We're in business, boys. If there is anybody across the street, they have their hands full," Copeland said. "It's about time something went our way," Johnson muttered. "Baker, get this door open," Copeland ordered, motioning towards the chain on the side of the door. Baker grabbed the chain and started pulling it open as quickly as he could. Both Copeland and Johnson took a knee to either side of the bay door, training their weapons on the warehouse across from them, just in case there was resistance. Baker moved his arms as fast as he could, his muscles burning as he continually yanked on the chain. It only took a matter of seconds before the door was high enough for the others to be able to see outside. There were a few zombies within 10 yards of the door, who immediately began shambling in that direction due to the noise. Once Copeland realized nobody was shooting at them, he slid out through the door, hitting the ground and immediately drawing his knife. The sergeant honed in on the closest zombie, driving the knife deep into its head before kicking the ghoul off. As it slammed to the ground, he rushed towards the next one, delivering another kill shot. "Well, come on." Copeland's words reached Baker and Johnson, both of whom quickly jumped down to the ground and joined the fray. Both soldiers used the butt of their rifles to crack the skulls of approaching zombies. The noise they were making drew the attention of the horde by the open bay door. Their moans filled the air as they turned and shambled towards the fresh prey. "Get up the street. Go," Copeland ordered. The three men broke away from the fight, running hard towards the side street between the next row of warehouses. Baker led the charge, reaching the open area first. As soon as he crossed the threshold, a gunshot rang out from the other side of the warehouse they had just exited. The bullet whizzed by Baker, causing him to pump his legs faster. Copeland heard the shot as he approached the edge of the building. He diverted his route, taking up position at the corner with his rifle at the ready. "Keep running, Johnson," he shouted. The private did as instructed, picking up his pace and moving as quickly as he could. As he crossed into the open space, Copeland came around the corner with his rifle, immediately spotting a moving truck that was parked at the far end of the street. The sergeant caught the glint of a sniper's scope coming from the roof of the truck. "Got you," he muttered under his breath. Copeland aimed quickly, squeezing the trigger and sending several rounds toward the top part of the truck. He couldn't tell if his shots hit the enemy sniper, but he saw flailed movement coming from the man. The sergeant didn't wait to see if it was a kill shot before following in Johnson's footsteps and running across the space between the buildings. As he ran, Baker and Johnson stood like sentinels in front of the next building, covering the sergeant as he sprinted. "I told you they had those offices covered," Johnson called out. Yeah, whatever." "Now what?" Baker replied. "Keep moving," Copeland barked. The trio turned and continued running towards the factory, which was still several buildings away. They barely made it halfway up the next warehouse before gunshots erupted behind them, forcing them to take up a defensive position and return fire. All three men aimed towards an open bay door in the building across from them, laying down suppressing fire. They managed to drive the shooter back behind cover, giving them an opportunity to move towards a truck that was 20 yards up from their position. The gunfire started up again as they got within 5 yards of the truck. Rather than go around it, all three of them dove underneath it, crawling as quickly as they could as the bullets smacked into the side of the truck. The trio emerged and scrambled to the sides, planting their backs against the wheel wells for extra protection. "Well, this is going well," Baker muttered sarcastically, glancing at Copeland. Copeland looked up alongside the rest of the building, which only had 30 more yards to go, and there was nothing standing between them and the next street. "This truck should give us enough cover to get up to the corner of the building," he said. "Then what?" Johnson asked, his voice edged with anxiety. "We move back a row and keep moving," Copeland answered. "What the hell? That's good enough for me," Johnson said. As the trio got to their feet, they heard footsteps echoing off the pavement ahead. A lone militiaman came running around the corner, his rifle at the ready, raising it towards the three soldiers. Before any of them could react, a gunshot popped off from a rooftop across the street. The bullet ripped through the back of the man's head, blowing out the front portion of his face and permanently dropping him to the ground. The three men looked up to the rooftop, spotting a smiling Kowalski. "That's my boy," Copeland muttered, a grin spreading across his face. "Keep moving. I'll cover you." Chapter 3. The trio of exposed soldiers didn't waste any time. They broke from their position, sprinting up the wall of the warehouse. Once they reached the corner, Copeland took cover, readying his rifle and aiming it back toward the open bay door across the street. "When I give the signal, I want you to haul ass across the street," Sergeant Copeland instructed. "Get up to the building that Kowalski is in and let him know where we're going." Baker glanced at him. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to make sure that sneaky bastard taking pot shots at us regrets his life choices," Copeland replied. Johnson and Baker nodded, preparing to run, just waiting for Copeland to give them the go-ahead. After several tense seconds, the sergeant was ready for action. "Move," Copeland barked. He led the trio out from behind cover, his eyes locked down the sights of his rifle toward the open bay door. The door was emerging from behind the back end of the transfer truck they had been using for cover. Baker and Johnson put their heads down and pumped their legs hard, concentrating on one thing: getting across the street. A single shot rang out from the warehouse in the distance, the bullet whizzing by them as they ran. Copeland took aim and squeezed the trigger several times, sending rounds toward the open door. He couldn't see anyone inside, but the incoming fire confirmed they were there. His shot sparked against the metal door, signaling his aim was in the right area. He kept firing as he moved across the street, only stopping when he no longer had an angle. "Everybody good?" Copeland called out. "Yeah," Johnson replied, "but it would be nice if those bullets stopped getting so damn close." Baker chuckled. "Be careful what you wish for, Johnson." He motioned toward the wound on Johnson's arm, prompting a playful middle finger from the other soldier. "Come on, let's get up to Kowalski," Copeland ordered. The sergeant led the men up the side of the building, spotting a parked tractor trailer 30 yards ahead. They quickly ducked underneath it, getting to the other side when they were forced to stop dead in their tracks. "That's not ideal," Johnson muttered. 50 yards ahead, dozens of zombies poured out from the side street. Several of the ghouls immediately locked onto them, letting out excited moans as they shambled in their direction. "Do we go around them?" Baker asked. "And get back into the line of fire," Johnson countered. The sergeant ignored the back and forth, instead putting his fingers into his mouth and letting out a deafening whistle before yelling, "Kowalski." A few seconds later, the sniper let out a whistle of his own from above them at the corner of the next building. "What's up, Sarge?" "How are we looking on that side street?" Copeland asked. "There's another 30 or 40 of those things stretched out, but most of them are just mingling," Kowalski reported. "We're going to cut through this warehouse and make a play for the factory," Copeland informed him. "Sounds good, Sarge. I'll cover you for as long as." Kowalski's sentence was cut short as bullets smacked into the roof's edge, mere inches away from him, forcing the sniper to drop out of sight. Baker responded immediately, rushing to the corner of the truck and firing in the general direction of the shots to get them to stop. After a few bullets flew, he managed to spot the culprits, 3 militiamen at the corner of the previous building. Adjusting his aim, Baker landed a shot right in the chest of one of the gunmen, dropping him to the ground, but not killing him. Damn vests. The other two militiamen returned fire, bullets pinging off the back of the truck. Baker fired back before taking cover to reload and yell to the others, "What are we doing, Sarge?" Copeland looked up the building wall, hoping to spot a way inside. While the bay doors were locked up tight, there was a pedestrian entrance 30 yards up. The sergeant calculated that the door would be in the militia's line of sight. "We're going into the warehouse. There's a door 30 yards up," Copeland shouted. "What about these assholes?" Baker asked. "You and Johnson cover us, and I'll take care of the door," Copeland instructed. Several more bullets smacked into the back of the truck, keeping Baker behind cover. "What the hell are we waiting on?" he demanded. "Move," Copeland ordered. He sprinted toward the door, moving quickly. Behind him, both Baker and Johnson kept a steady stream of bullets flying back at the militia, keeping them at bay. "Get there, man, get there!" Copeland willed himself forward, even when a few poorly aimed shots flew toward him. But the gunshots weren't the only threat. The mob of ghouls was getting closer and closer to blocking their escape route. As Copeland reached the door, he didn't bother turning the doorknob. Instead, he raised his rifle and pumped half a dozen rounds into the locking mechanism. Within seconds, the door was freed from the frame. "We're in. Move," Copeland yelled. He turned and opened fire toward the militia, who were still pinned down at the corner of the building across the way. Johnson and Baker took advantage, both of them rushing toward the open door. While Copeland fired, he kept the encroaching horde in the corner of his eye, watching them get within 5 yards before acting. With a deft move, the sergeant spun around and pumped rounds into the 3 lead creatures, dropping them into a heap and causing a logjam of zombies as they tripped over the fallen bodies. He didn't linger, immediately turning back and firing the last remaining bullets from his magazine toward the militia, giving his men the time they needed to get inside. "We're good," Sarge Johnson yelled out as he rushed by, and Copeland didn't waste time joining them. The sergeant hadn't made it 2 steps inside the building before he was greeted by gunfire. He aimed his rifle in the direction it was coming from, relieved to see it was only Baker, who had taken down a zombie. Johnson pulled his flashlight and quickly shined it in the immediate area, which was bathed in shadow. With a quick sweep, he saw that they were the only things moving. "We're clear, at least right here." Johnson flinched as more gunfire erupted outside. He aimed his rifle toward the open door but didn't see any sign of the militia. However, a few seconds later, the first of the zombies shambled into the opening, letting out an excited moan. "Well, at least they aren't shooting at us," Johnson remarked. "Come on, we have to keep moving," Copeland urged. The sergeant motioned for the others to follow as they jogged along the bay doors toward the factory. All the while, they heard gunshots going off outside. "Do you think that's Kowalski?" Baker asked. "That boy has more lives than a cat, so I wouldn't put it past him," Copeland replied. The group listened as more shots went off before falling silent. Either he put them all down or Johnson trailed off, not wanting to finish the thought. "It doesn't matter, we can't do anything for him right now anyway," Copeland said firmly. Despite their obvious worry, the trio pushed on, making their way to the far wall of the warehouse, which was solid with no exits. At the other corner, however, there appeared to be a small office area. "This way," Copeland directed. He led them down the aisle toward the offices, weapons raised and at the ready. Upon reaching the door, the sergeant moved swiftly, pulling it open and letting the 2 privates rush inside. The office area was tight, with only a couple of cubicles in the middle of the floor. Both privates swept the room, yelling out clear before the trio took up a position beside the front window. Looking out into the street, they spotted a couple of dozen creatures spread out thinly. Most of the ghouls were shambling down the side street, drawn to the recent gunfire. "We're what? 3 blocks down from the factory?" Copeland asked. "Something like that. It should be a straight shot down this street." "The worst case is that it's 1 more block to the south," Baker replied. "We can manage that," Copeland affirmed. Johnson broke away from the others, spotting a small window along the southern wall that gave him a vantage point to look back in the direction from which they had come. "What do you see?" Johnson Copeland asked. "Not much. A few dead zombies in the road, and that's about it," Johnson reported. "How many?" Copeland inquired. "Fewer than a dozen," Johnson replied. "They most likely came through here," Copeland mused. "And if those boys we were shooting at got a message out, then they're going to know exactly where we are," Baker warned. "I'm hoping that Kowalski managed to take care of them," Copeland said. "And if he didn't?" Johnson asked. "Then this is going to be a short trip. Regardless, we can't stay here," Copeland stated. Johnson let out a sigh before nodding in agreement. "Well, let's get it over with then." Copeland reached out and unlocked the exterior door, the thunk of the deadbolt attracting the attention of a few nearby zombies. "Just blow by them," he instructed. The two privates muttered "yes, sir" as the sergeant threw open the door, bolting out from the building and running straight for the nearest creature. With a forceful shoulder strike, the ghoul stumbled to the ground, clearing the path forward for the soldiers. All three of them ran as hard as they could, sticking close to the building for some semblance of cover. As they moved, they were forced to duck underneath a couple of trucks parked at the warehouse, relieved that there was nothing on the other side. The trio continued moving up the street, the ammunition factory coming into view at the end of the next block. The fence around it was high, 8 feet with barbed wire. However, at some point, a large vehicle had smashed through a portion of it, creating a massive hole. The factory itself stood tall, much taller than any of the warehouses, with 2 metal towers sticking out from either side. Copeland stopped the group at the corner of the last warehouse, poking his head out from behind cover to check for threats. While there were no militia, he spotted several zombies roaming around the grounds of the factory. "There's a couple dozen of those things roaming about, but I don't see anybody with guns, so that's a plus," Copeland observed. "So what do you want to do?" Johnson asked. Copeland pulled out his binoculars, looking out toward the main factory building. The structure appeared to be in good shape, with no discernible damage. One of the large bay doors just off to the side was wide open, with a handful of zombies milling about. The one thing he didn't see were corpses on the ground. "It looks like it's just a handful of those things, which we can handle. So we're going to get inside, secure the building, and hope to God that Kowalski isn't too far behind us," Copeland concluded. Baker and Johnson gave a confident nod to the sergeant. "Let's move out." Chapter 4. Kowalski opened his eyes, looking up to the sky as the sun momentarily blinded him. It took him a moment to figure out where he was, on the roof of a warehouse. However, everything came flooding back to him as he began to move. An intense, white-hot pain shot through his body, radiating out from his chest. Kowalski let out a grunt, which only caused him more discomfort. "What the hell?" he muttered. Kowalski reached down towards the pain, only to recoil as his fingertips touched a hot piece of metal embedded into his protective vest. "Son of a..." he cursed under his breath. Kowalski pulled himself up, looking down at his chest, seeing a bullet that had been right on target for his heart, only to be stopped by Kevlar. He tried to get up but continued sitting there, as even the simplest of movements caused him pain. "I'm going to kill that bastard. And I'm aiming for the head," he vowed, his voice low and dangerous. Kowalski flinched when gunshots began popping off on the street below. The firefight was intense, but despite his best efforts, he wasn't able to pull himself back up into a firing position. The soreness coursing out from the impact forced him to sit there for another few moments. "Come on, Kowalski, pull yourself together, man. They need you," he urged himself, his tone a mix of frustration and determination. Kowalski let out a low grunt as he forced himself to move, rolling over and getting to one knee. He checked his rifle, popping in a few more rounds to top it off before inching towards the edge. The gunshots below stopped abruptly, making Kowalski fear the worst. Even though it was tremendously painful, Kowalski took a deep breath to center himself before moving the last few inches so that he had a view of the militiamen across the street. Kowalski saw one of the men on the ground in intense pain from taking a round to his vest. The other 2 men were still behind cover, aiming towards the position where Copeland and the others were. "Just give me a target. One clean shot," he whispered, his eyes narrowing as he focused on the task. Kowalski kept his sniper rifle trained on the corner of the building, waiting for the first gunman to step out. He didn't have to wait long. As soon as one of them stepped out, Kowalski didn't let him take a second step. Squeezing the trigger, and sending a round straight through his forehead, sending him collapsing to the ground in a heap. "There's one," Kowalski said to himself, satisfied but still tense. He kept his aim, waiting for the next one to step out, but the man was smart enough not to expose himself. Instead, he extended his rifle around the corner, aiming it in the sniper's general direction and pulling the trigger. A torrent of bullets flew towards Kowalski, who ducked back down behind cover. He was far enough back on the roof that it cut off most of the angle for the militiaman. Kowalski bided his time, waiting for the gun to fall silent before popping back up and focusing on the corner of the building. The gunman poked his head around the corner, but not quite far enough for Kowalski to have a clean shot. That didn't stop him from pulling the trigger, sending a round into the side of the building. The bullet shattered on impact, sending shards of metal flying towards the man who recoiled back behind cover. "That's going to have to do," Kowalski muttered. He got up from his position, running as hard as he could back towards the roof hatch. Despite the pain coursing through his body, he pressed on, knowing he didn't have long to get to safety. He heard a few more gunshots go off behind him as he ran, hoping that they were intended for him and not the others. "You boys better be safe and heading to the factory, because the last thing I want to do is clear out shamblers," he grumbled as he reached the hatch, putting his feet on the ladder and beginning to descend. He managed to get a few rungs down before gunshots inside rang out, the bullets slamming into the ceiling and forcing him back up top. Kowalski rolled over onto his back as the bullets continued to slam into the ceiling. While he was relieved they weren't strong enough to punch through, he knew it wouldn't be long before there wasn't a rooftop to protect him. Kowalski pulled himself up and began running towards the other side of the building, hoping that there was a ladder. It took several moments for him to reach the far edge of the building, looking down and letting out a sigh when he saw it was nothing but a flat wall. "Well, shit. Now what?" he muttered, frustration clear in his voice. Kowalski moved over to the bay door wall, looking down and still seeing no way to climb down. "Think, man, think," he urged himself, staring down, hoping that inspiration would strike him. Finally, an idea sparked, even if it wasn't a particularly good one. 20 yards back, a tractor trailer was backed up to the building. However, it was a good 10-foot drop from the rooftop to it. "You're going to break your neck if you do that," he told himself, his gaze fixed on the truck. Kowalski stared at the truck for several moments before glancing back to the rooftop hatch, knowing that he had incoming. He let out a frustrated grunt before running over to where the truck was. Standing atop the roof and looking straight down at the truck didn't ease his concerns. If anything, it amplified them. "Why did I think this was a good idea?" he asked himself, shaking his head in frustration. Kowalski knew this was the only way. He slung his rifle over his shoulder and climbed over the edge of the building, holding onto the rooftop so that he could get as low as he could before letting go. With one more look down to confirm that he was directly above the top of the truck, he let go. A split second after releasing his grip, his feet slammed into the trailer, sending more pain rampaging through his body. He immediately collapsed onto the roof of the vehicle, the wind partially knocked out of him. It took him a few seconds to regain normal breathing, which was followed by a string of curse words. "I really hate my job," Kowalski groaned. He heard a few gunshots go off from down the street, provoking him to move quickly. He rolled towards the side of the truck, flinging his feet over the edge first and attempting to grasp onto the ledge. Despite his best efforts, his momentum was more than his hands could handle, and he plummeted to the ground below. Kowalski knew he was in trouble as he was falling, preparing himself to land hard. As soon as his feet touched the pavement, he leaned back, hoping to take some of the strain off his knees and ankles, knowing that a major injury would be his end. Kowalski tumbled backwards, landing hard on the ground, knocking what little breath he still had in his lungs out of him. As he lay there in pain, he heard the unmistakable sound of a zombie shuffle and moan coming from just up the road. Kowalski rolled over, spotting half a dozen creatures that were shuffling in his direction, the closest 10 yards away and closing. The sniper attempted to let out a quip to calm his nerves, a typical coping mechanism for him, but the lack of air in his lungs managed to produce a sound that resembled a dry heave rather than a witty comment. Kowalski reached for his handgun but thought better of it, knowing that if he opened fire he would be letting his would-be assassins know exactly where he was. so he begrudgingly drew his knife before staggering towards the first creature. Kowalski let out a pained grunt as he lunged forward, swinging his blade in a hopeful manner rather than a precise one. Much to his surprise, the knife found the eye socket of the first zombie, dropping it to the ground. Kowalski pulled his weapon free before putting his head down and picking up as much steam as he could. He hit the next creature square in the gut with his shoulder, shoving it backwards into the next two, creating a lane for him to escape. The sniper made it to the side of the building, ducking around the corner and moving as fast as he could towards the next street. Much to his surprise and relief, nobody was taking a shot at him as he went. As he made the turn, he saw that there wasn't a zombie within 30 yards of him, all the way up to the next truck. As much as it hurt him, he pressed on, getting around the truck and taking a knee behind it to regain his composure. It took a solid minute of deep breathing to fully regain the use of his lungs, but finally he was breathing well. Okay, it's the home stretch. Suck it up and get moving, Kowalski muttered, steeling himself for the final push. He willed himself forward, every muscle in his body screaming at him with every step, yet he continued moving. It took a couple of minutes before he was at the last warehouse before the factory. He took a knee at the corner to survey the scene, spotting the gaping hole in the fence, along with the trail of bodies leading up to the building. "Please tell me you did this, Sarge," he whispered to himself, pulling out his flashlight and aiming it in the direction of the building, clicking it on and off in a specific manner. Come on," he urged, hoping for a response. A few moments later, a small light flickered on and off from the building in the appropriate rhythm that let Kowalski know it was a friendly. "Now we're talking," he said with relief. Kowalski broke from cover, moving quickly across the open space and up to the building. As he approached, Johnson stepped out with his rifle at the ready, aiming it back towards the street. "Jesus, Kowalski, you look like shit," Johnson remarked, his eyes wide with concern. "And I feel even worse," Kowalski replied, his voice laced with exhaustion. Johnson stepped out, grabbing onto Kowalski to help him inside the building. He walked him over to a desk, setting him down in a comfy office chair. "Where are the others?" Kowalski asked, looking around the room. "They're doing a sweep of the place." "But damn, man, are you okay? Are you hit?" Johnson asked, concern etched on his face. "Took a round to the vest, then fell off a roof." "Twice," Kowalski admitted, grimacing. Johnson thought about it for a moment before walking over to a desk and yanking open several of the drawers. When he didn't find what he was looking for, he moved on to the next desk, rattling a few more drawers before spotting it. "There we go," Johnson said, walking back over to Kowalski and tossing him a bottle of ibuprofen. "Here, this should help," Johnson offered. "How in the hell did you find this?" Kowalski asked, catching the bottle. "These people work in a factory, so they're bound to get headaches," Johnson replied with a shrug. Kowalski chuckled as he threw a small fistful of pills into his mouth and downed them. "I hope these kick in soon," he said, leaning back in the chair. Before Johnson could respond, Copeland came back into the office, a grin spreading across his face when he spotted the sniper. "You're a hard man to kill, Kowalski," Sergeant Copeland said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Trust me, it's not due to a lack of them trying," Kowalski replied with a weary smile. "Are you good to go?" Sergeant Copeland asked, his tone all business. "Yeah, I'll manage. Where do you want me?" Kowalski responded, standing up despite the pain. "If you can manage the climb, I need you up on one of those towers. Don't need you at the top, just high enough to see how bad things are looking," Sergeant Copeland instructed, pointing towards the nearest tower. "You got it, Sarge," Kowalski agreed. He pulled himself out of the chair, letting out a grunt as he did. He quickly straightened up, not wanting to let on just how much pain he was in. It took him a few minutes to walk down the long corridor towards the entrance to the tower, where he was faced with a spiral staircase that seemed to stretch on for eternity. With a deep sigh, he began climbing. After a few rotations, he emerged into the open air, giving him a good view of the entire warehouse district. "Yeah, one more rotation should do," Kowalski muttered, pushing himself up the final few steps. He found a nice spot to take up position, collapsing onto the stairs. He pulled out his binoculars to do a sweep of the area. The first spot he looked at was the target warehouse, which was littered with dead zombies on the ground. "Looks like they're cleaning house," he observed, his eyes scanning the scene. Kowalski continued looking, seeing several men moving in and out of the warehouse, some carrying lightweight boxes that were stacked several high. "That's got to be food, or else those boys are benching 600 pounds, he said. Finally, Kowalski turned his attention towards the 1,000-strong mob that was marching towards them. It didn't take long for him to spot them, as they were less than half a mile away from the entrance to the warehouse district and stretched deep into the horizon. Kowalski lowered the binoculars, letting out a sigh as he sat back in an attempt to get more comfortable and alleviate some of the pain. "Captain, I hope you heard enough of my message to know we're in trouble, because we're going to need some backup on this one." Chapter 5. Captain Kersey stood in the middle of the break room, the radio firmly in hand as he awaited a response from Kowalski. Standing beside him were Corporal Bretz and Private Wade, both of whom had been listening to the entire conversation. "I don't like the way this is sounding, Kersey," Bretz said, his voice tinged with concern. "Me either, Corporal," Kersey replied, his tone equally uneasy. "Do you want me to get a vehicle ready, Cap?" Wade asked. "Yeah," Kersey agreed, "and let the others know to be on alert. If our militia watchers out there see us leaving, they might make a play for the factory." "Shoot on sight orders?" Wade inquired, his eyes narrowing as he prepared for the worst. "If anybody gets within a quarter mile, they're to light them up," Kersey instructed with a grim nod. "Copy that," Wade responded before exiting the room, leaving Kersey and Brett staring down at the radio, almost as if they were willing it back to life. But nothing came through. "I'm good to lead this excursion if you want me to," Bretz offered, breaking the silence. "I can take a couple of the newbies and—" Kersey began shaking his head at the idea, causing Bretz to trail off without finishing his thought. "This whole thing stinks, Bretz," Kersey said, his voice filled with frustration. "Either the militia planted those docks at the last factory and laid a trap for us, or the info was legit, and the militia is going to pull out all the stops to secure the goods. Either way, our boys are in trouble, and I aim to get them out of it." Bretz nodded, admiration for his captain evident in his expression. His mindset was a firm reminder of why he was willing to follow Kersey anywhere. After a few more tense moments of waiting, the radio crackled to life, but instead of a clear signal, it was filled with static and difficult to hear. "Cap, we're in trouble. Someone is jamming our signal." Kowalski's voice came through, distorted and fragmented. "Say again, Kowalski." "You're breaking up," Kersey said urgently, pressing the radio right up to his ear, struggling to hear through the static. While he could hear Kowalski's voice, the poor connection made it impossible to understand what he was saying. "Let's move," Kersey ordered. Kersey burst out of the break room, Bretz following close behind as they ran through the factory toward the back. As they exited the building, Wade pulled up in an SUV. "So we're on?" Wade asked. "Yeah, they're in trouble," Bretz confirmed. "I'll get us there quick," Wade assured them. "We're making a stop first," Kersey interjected. "Yes, sir. Just tell me where we're going," Wade said. "Get us to that rental truck place where we borrowed the transport vans," Kersey instructed. "I'm on it," Wade replied, immediately setting the SUV in motion. As Wade peeled out from the parking lot of the factory, Bretz looked back at the captain with a confused expression. "What are you thinking, Kersey?" "Kowalski said they have thousands of those things approaching from the east, so we're going to have to take the long way around and approach from the west," Kersey explained. "That means we're going to be punching through the bridge and the downtown area. And I doubt this vehicle is up to the task." "Another big-ass truck plowing through zombies," Bretz remarked with a grim smile. "I can see why you brought me along for the ride." Kersey chuckled to himself before turning his attention to his rifle, giving it a full check as Wade drove them toward their destination. It took several uneventful minutes before the rental truck place was within their sights. Wade pulled over to the side of the road a couple of blocks away, giving them a chance to survey the situation. Captain Kersey pulled out his binoculars, studying the site and seeing significant movement in the parking lot. A couple dozen creatures were milling about, but none of them were inside the fenced-off parking area where the larger trucks were situated. Okay, this is going to be a little trickier than I thought, Kersey muttered as he handed over the binoculars to Brett, who took his own look. Damn it. It looks like some of the crowd we attracted the last time we were here decided to hang out, Brett observed with a frown. How did you do it last time? Wade asked. We went in through the front, picked up the keys and a battery jumper, then headed out, Brett explained. How did you leave the front door? Kersey asked. We didn't think we were coming back, so it's locked up tight, Brett replied. Just a deadbolt? Or is it barricaded too? Kersey pressed further. I don't remember what we pulled in front of the door, only that it was heavy as hell, Brett admitted. Lovely, Kersey muttered under his breath. We could go over the fence? Wade suggested, though his tone lacked confidence. Brett shook his head as he handed the binoculars over to Wade, who quickly answered his own question as he spotted barbed wire at the top. Or maybe not, Wade conceded. I'm pretty sure we have a tarp in the back that we can throw over the barbed wire, Brett said. Been there and done that as a kid. Still have the scars to prove it, Wade replied with a wry smile. Gotta love a reckless upbringing, Brett said with a chuckle. So how are we getting in there? Or do you want to go down the street and see if we can find another rental place? Wade asked. We're going in through the front window, Kersey declared, his voice leaving no room for argument. Both Wade and Brett turned around to the captain with bewildered looks on their faces. That's a bold move, Wade remarked. We're going to have a hell of a fight on our hands because those windows go straight to the floor, Brett warned. I'm sure there are other rental places in the area, Wade suggested. We're on the clock, and we know for a fact this place has exactly what we need, Kersey stated firmly. I don't want to run the risk of the next place we find not having a battery jumper. You're right, Brett agreed, resigned to the plan. How close do you want to get? Wade asked, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Edge of the parking lot. Kersey replied. Wade, you pull them to the left. Brett, get the gear out of the back, and I'll take care of the window. Once we're inside, I'll cover the window while you two get us a truck. Wade nodded as he hit the gas, causing the SUV to lurch forward and pick up speed. Within seconds, they were at the outer edge of the parking lot. Knowing that they didn't need this vehicle any longer, Wade aimed the front end toward a small pack of ghouls, slamming into them and sending them flying through the air. With the immediate area clear, all three men stepped out of the SUV, raising their weapons and opening fire at nearby ghouls. Wade made a push to the left, yelling out and firing his assault rifle at a steady rate, his sniper training making the short-distance easy kills. Yeah, come on, over this way, assholes. Wade taunted, his voice echoing through the lot. The noise Wade made was more than enough to draw the attention of the majority of zombies in the lot. As they shambled toward him, a path for Kersey opened up all the way to the front of the building. The captain pumped his legs hard, crossing the parking lot in a matter of seconds. However, his footsteps drew the attention of a creature that was near the front of the store. Kersey aimed past the zombie, popping off several rounds into the window, spiderwebbing the glass and weakening it significantly. The captain then turned his attention to the creature, who was lunging for him. Kersey deftly sidestepped it, positioning himself between the zombie and the window, stopping a couple of yards from it. Come on now, I don't have all day, Kersey muttered. The zombie let out a moan, lunging forward again, only to have its arm grabbed and yanked toward the window. Kersey reached down, planting his hand between the zombie's legs and hoisting it off the ground, using its momentum to send it careening through the glass. The window shattered into 1,000 pieces as the creature slammed to the ground inside the store. Before it could get up, Kersey sent a round through its head. We're in, Kersey shouted as he darted inside the building, quickly looking around for anything that might be useful in slowing down the mob, but finding nothing. The only movable piece of furniture, a heavy sofa, was already against the door, and the rest of the chairs were bolted to the wall. Damn it, Kersey cursed under his breath. The gunfire outside continued as Bretts and Wade made their way toward the entrance. Kersey stepped into the doorway, picking targets on the outer edge of the pack and squeezing the trigger. The ghouls smacked down onto the ground, giving Wade a little more space to work with. A few moments later, both soldiers were through the front opening, the zombie mob slowly shambling behind them. "I'll hold them off. Get the biggest truck you can find up and running," Kersey ordered. "We're on it," Kersey, Bretts replied as he and Wade darted toward the back area of the shop. Kersey swapped out his magazine, putting in a fresh one for the impending battle. He stared out the broken opening while backpedaling through the store, raising his rifle and waiting for his moment to strike. "Okay, which one of you wants to be first?" Kersey muttered to himself as he bided his time, waiting for the first creature to reach the threshold before firing. The bullet ripped through the forehead of the zombie, dropping it to the ground. The captain fired off several more rounds in rapid succession, creating a line of bodies by the window. Kersey took a few more steps back, watching as several ghouls tripped over their fallen brethren. When one creature managed to step over the obstacle without a problem, Kersey fired a shot, ending the threat and creating another barrier. Nearly a minute of this went by before a loud honking sound emanated from the back lot. "That's my cue," Kersey muttered as he slung his rifle over his shoulder before turning and running through the back swinging door and straight out into the back lot through an open garage door. Awaiting him was a 20-foot moving truck that was rumbling in the lot. Bretts gave him another honk as the captain approached and got in. "Looks like you picked out a good one," Kersey said with a grin. "Just wait until you see what I can do with this thing," Bretts replied, a mischievous glint in his eye. Bretts threw the truck into gear before slamming on the gas. The truck lurched forward, picking up speed as it hurtled toward the locked chain-link gate. The front end of the truck slammed into the fence, sending the gate flying open and knocking several nearby creatures down in the process. It took Bretts a few bumpy moments to get it onto the road, but he quickly got it under control for smooth driving. Next stop, Ontario. Chapter 6. Corporal Bretts kept the truck's speed up as he drove along the main road leading across the river into Ontario. While there hadn't been many zombies on the road, when one wandered into their path, he wanted to ensure they plowed right through it. The soldiers inside the cab barely felt it when the truck demolished a zombie, sending the corpse flying into the field beside the road. Once the truck had settled back into its steady pace, Wade glanced over at Bretts and commented, "Once this thing gets moving, it's smooth sailing, isn't it?" "At least until we come up against a mob," Bretts replied, his voice steady. Wade didn't say anything, not wanting to jinx them. However, as they rounded the next bend, he muttered obscenities under his breath, realizing he might have done just that. "And there they are," Bretts said, his tone flat but resolute. A quarter-mile ahead, directly in front of them, was the bridge leading over the river into Ontario. It was packed full of zombies, a couple hundred of them wandering between a handful of discarded vehicles that had been pushed to the side. Beyond the initial mass of rotting flesh, hundreds more were spread out onto the streets. Bretts studied the path carefully, plotting their way through. "Okay, Kersey," Bretts called back. "Where are we going once we get across the bridge? Because the last thing we're going to want to do is slow down. This thing will punch a hole through them if we're at speed, but it's going to be a pain in the ass getting it rolling again if we stop." Kersey thought about it for a moment, visualizing the town in his mind. Finally, he spoke up. "We're going straight through. After a couple of miles, we'll hang a right to the north and go from there. The town isn't that big, so the warehouse district can't be that hard to find." "Okay, straight through it is." "Buckle up, boys, because it's going to be a bumpy ride," Bretts warned, his tone serious. Both Kersey and Wade, who was stuck in the middle seat, did as instructed and strapped in for the trip through town. Once secured, Bretts gripped the wheel with both hands before slamming his foot down on the gas pedal. It took a moment for the truck to pick up speed, but before long it was moving at a solid 50 miles an hour. The corporal let out a yell as they reached the front edge of the bridge horde. The impact was jarring. Everyone inside the cab lurched forward at the sudden loss of speed as the truck slammed into the mass of rotting flesh. Despite the speed loss, the truck kept pace at 40 miles an hour. It continued pushing through the mass, the entire vehicle bouncing up and down as bodies were crushed underneath the tires. It took several tense seconds for them to clear the bridge and get into town. Captain Kersey stole a glance in the rearview mirror, gazing upon two distinct lines of crushed zombies on either side of writhing bodies struggling to get up. "That's some good driving, Bretz," he said, admiration in his voice. "You may want to hold the praise," Bretz replied, "because we still have a ways to go." Bretz didn't divert his gaze from the road, staring intently out the front windshield as the truck smashed into more zombies. The next block was quite bumpy but began to smooth out as the zombie congestion eased up. Instead of hundreds per block, there were only dozens. Before the group knew it, they were driving out of the business district, hitting an open area that led into a neighborhood about a half-mile ahead. "Should I turn here?" Bretz asked, his eyes scanning the road ahead. "Let's get on the other side of that neighborhood," Kersey decided. "I'd rather overshoot the warehouse district than drive up on that 1,000-strong horde." "I'm with you on that," Bretz agreed. He glanced down at the gauges on the dash, where a few engine warning lights were illuminated. He let out a sigh as he eased up on the gas a bit. "Why are you slowing down?" Wade asked. "Because while we got through the mob, they managed to do some damage," Bretz explained, pointing down to the lights. Wade let out an exasperated sigh. "Do you think we'll make it?" "We're certainly going to try," Bretz replied. Bretz kept the truck rolling into the neighborhood, which had a smattering of zombies roaming about, but nowhere near the density of the horde in town. The neighborhood was quaint, with lots of brick 1- and 2-story houses, tree-lined roads, and a surprising number of cars still parked in driveways. A few blocks from their position, they saw an open area with a large parking lot on their right. As their attention was drawn toward it, trying to figure out what it was, tires screeched to their left. Bretz turned his head just in time to see a couple of sedans speeding toward them. "Oh shit," Bretz exclaimed, doing his best to avoid the collision, but there simply wasn't enough time. The first car slammed into the front axle of the truck, jolting the men inside around in the cab. The second car wedged itself underneath the center portion of the truck, carrying enough speed that half of the roof was ripped away. The sound of grinding metal filled the air as the trapped car dragged along the pavement. A few seconds later, smoke poured out from the front of the truck when the broken axle snapped free, causing metal to press against metal. Bretz had no choice but to slam on the brakes, or else risk a fire breaking out. Before they had come to a full stop, bullets peppered the side of the truck, with one ripping through the driver's side window. "Move, move," Kersey shouted, throwing open the door to the truck and jumping to the ground, stumbling as he landed on the pavement. Almost immediately, he was greeted by a moaning zombie lunging for him. Kersey used his stumbling momentum to dive to the ground, right into the knees of the creature. An audible snap filled the air as both legs cracked from the impact before the zombie flung backward. The back of its head slammed onto the pavement, cracking the skull and ending the threat. Kersey scrambled to his feet as the bullets continued to fly toward the truck. He turned to watch as Wade jumped down, but Bretz remained in the cab. The captain couldn't see exactly what was happening inside the truck, but the muzzle flashes let him know that Bretz was returning fire. Kersey put his fingers in his mouth and let out a deafening whistle. "Bretz, move your ass," he ordered. A couple of seconds later, Bretz jumped from the truck, landing hard on the asphalt, nearly toppling over in the process. The only thing that saved him was Wade grabbing onto his arm and holding him up. "I appreciate it," Bretz said. "We need cover," now Wade urged, raising his assault rifle before popping off a few rounds into the heads of nearby zombies that were getting too close for comfort. Meanwhile, Bretz rushed back to the truck, reaching into the front seat and pulling out a large canvas bag filled with their gear. "Get to the house," Kersey shouted, leading the charge across the yard. He lowered his shoulder and knocked a couple of zombies to the ground as he rushed toward the 2-story house on the corner. As he reached the door, he tried the handle, only to find it locked. Without a moment's thought, he raised his rifle and fired through the lock, forcing the door open. Kersey rushed inside with his rifle raised, immediately hearing moaning and commotion coming from the kitchen on the other side of the living room. Rather than wait for the zombies to emerge, he rushed through the house and around the wall. A zombie family of 3 that had been smacking against the back glass patio door turned their attention toward Kersey as he entered the kitchen. They barely managed to emit a moan before the captain unloaded on them. With 3 quick shots, The family fell silent. Kersey finished doing a sweep of the first floor, finding nothing else. As he returned to the living room, both Brett and Wade rushed in through the door, the corporal firing several rounds at an unseen adversary. "Get in here," Kersey commanded, ducking down as he crossed the threshold into the house. He spun around and flung the door shut just before bullets began flying through it. All three men took cover as a torrent of hot lead poured through the front of the house. Several seconds later, the gunshots fell silent, as if their enemies were waiting for the soldiers to return fire. "Wade, where's your sniper rifle?" Kersey asked. "Canvas bag," Wade replied. "Get it and get up to the second floor. Make sure our friends stay put," Kersey ordered. "You got it," Cap Wade responded, staying low as he rushed over to the bag, grabbing his sniper rifle, and booking it up the stairs. It took him a few moments to get into position inside the master bedroom at the corner of the house. "Okay, assholes. Let's see who wants to play," Wade muttered to himself as he peered through his scope, scanning the houses across the street. All he saw were dead zombies in the front yards. It took several moments of intense looking before he spotted movement in the form of a ruffled curtain. Wade didn't hesitate to squeeze the trigger, sending a round right through the glass. He wasn't confident he got a kill shot, but he knew it would be enough to make them think twice before pushing toward the house. As Wade continued his watch, Brett stayed vigilant at the front of the house. While he didn't see any militia running around, he did spot several dozen zombies in the streets being pulled in multiple directions. "I think Wade's shot is giving them pause," Brett observed. "Good, because we need a minute to think," Kersey replied, moving to the back patio door. He looked through the gaps in the houses across the way and saw nothing but a handful of zombies milling about. A few blocks up, however, he spotted the building attached to the giant parking lot. A massive 3-story brick school building that looked like it had been standing there for decades. As the bullets flew in both directions at the front of the house, Kersey took a knee by the door, staring at the building. "This is such a bad idea," Kersey, he muttered to himself, his mind racing as he tried to come up with a plan to get them out of the situation. But the only thing he could come up with was risky. After several moments of contemplation, he clicked on his communicator, hoping they weren't being jammed. "Brett's, Wade, can you hear me?" Kersey called out. "I got you," Cap Bretts responded immediately. "Same here," Wade added. "What's it look like out front?" Kersey asked. "There's some movement in the houses across the way, but it's hard to tell how many we're dealing with," Wade reported. "We have to assume they have us outmanned and outgunned," Kersey stated. "What else is new?" Bretts muttered. "We might want to assume they have reinforcements coming too. If they get us surrounded," Wade trailed off, knowing he'd made his point. "Which is why you and Bretts are going to break out of here," Kersey said, his voice resolute. Kersey Bretts' tone was that of a concerned yet disappointed parent addressing a misbehaving child. "Save it," Corporal Kersey cut him off. "It's what needs to happen. I'm going to cover your escape, then fall back to the school that's a couple blocks away." "And then what? Are you going to enroll in some night classes?" Bretts quipped, his voice tinged with sarcasm. "I'm going to hopefully lose them in there and regroup with you," Kersey explained. "Captain, I don't know if I like this," Bretts admitted, his voice filled with concern. "Luckily they're orders," Kersey replied, "so your opinion is noted. And that's the end of it." "Yes, sir," Bretts conceded. "Wade, get down here," Kersey ordered, "because you two are going to have to move." Chapter 7. Captain Kersey sat at the front window of the house, staring across the street through the growing horde of ghouls that crowded the pavement. He scanned the windows of the houses opposite, noting subtle movements, though nothing concrete enough to warrant a shot. Meanwhile, both Bretts and Wade positioned themselves at the back patio door, their eyes sweeping the yard for any signs of life. Beyond a handful of zombies on the next block, there was nothing. "So what's the play, Corporal?" Wade asked, breaking the silence. Bretts glanced at him, a frown creasing his brow. "We need transportation because that truck is busted." Wade shook his head, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "No kidding, we need transportation. But where are we getting it from?" "That's a little trickier," Bretts admitted. "I'd be surprised if we could get any of these cars started on the first try. Wade's voice was tinged with frustration. "Not to mention, as soon as we try, we're going to be drawing attention to ourselves." "Exactly," Brett agreed. "So what in the hell are we going to do?" Wade's impatience was clear. Brett's was silent for a few moments, then a devious smile spread across his face. "Oh, I like that look," Wade said, grinning. Brett's leaned closer, his voice low. "How much do you want to bet they went all in with trying to box us in? Like they weren't banking on someone staying behind to cover?" Wade considered it, then nodded. "Probably a pretty good bet." Brett's smile widened. "Well, while the captain keeps them tied up, let's go borrow one of their rides." Wade cracked a smile, and the duo exchanged a fist bump before Brett's called out, "We're on the move, Kersey." Kersey's response was curt. "Get up to our team and help them out." "We'll get there," Brett's replied. "You be safe." Kersey's voice carried a hint of dry humor. "I'm a lot of things, Corporal, but safe isn't one of them." "Yeah, no shit," Brett's muttered, chuckling along with Wade before they both focused on the task at hand. Brett's and Wade slid open the back patio door, slipping out with their rifles at the ready, guns trained on the two houses directly behind them. "Watch the windows," Brett's whispered. Wade nodded, his tone firm. "If somebody pops up, I'll put them down." The two soldiers made it halfway across the yard before gunfire erupted from the front of the house, Kersey laying down covering fire to ensure their escape. Neither man flinched or slowed down as they sprinted toward the next street. Taking position beside the next two houses, Brett's and Wade ensured full coverage of the street, which was eerily quiet, save for a dozen zombies who had yet to notice them. Wade glanced over to Brett's, who motioned for them to move out and start heading back toward the main road. The two men broke from cover, staying in the grass to remain as silent as possible, all but ignoring the nearby zombies who had finally taken notice. The creature's shambles were no match for the speed of the soldiers, who advanced toward the main road through the neighborhood, which was swarming with more zombies. Oblivious to their presence, the ghouls were drawn toward the gunfight on the next block. Brett's motioned for Wade to take a knee with him, both men crouching low in the front yard of the last house on the block, surveying the area. Brett's gaze remained fixed ahead, waiting intently for a gap in the horde. Wade, however, kept his eyes on the zombies slowly closing in on them from behind. "We have 30 seconds before we have rear contact," Wade whispered urgently. "Understood. Be ready to move on my signal," Brett's replied, his voice steady. Wade nodded, gripping his assault rifle tightly while keeping watch on the approaching assailants. 15 seconds, he warned. "Not yet," Brett's insisted. Wade kept his finger on the trigger, his offhand drawing a knife in preparation for a silent strike. But before he could act, Brett's gave the signal. "Let's move," Brett's ordered. Both men sprang from their position, sprinting onto the street. Their footsteps on the pavement caught the attention of a dozen nearby ghouls, who reached out helplessly as the two soldiers darted past. As they ran through the mob, several gunshots rang out from down the street, aimed at them. Bullets ripped into zombies, absorbing the hits and preventing the soldiers from being struck, but they knew they had been spotted. "If they left people by the cars, they're going to be expecting us," Wade shouted over the noise. "Then let's hope they're gone," Brett's replied. The two men dashed behind the next house, not stopping to see if they were being followed. They continued running down the street, getting half a block up before making a turn toward the road. Brett's took point, pausing at the corner of the house to scan the street, which was littered with corpses. Wade kept a vigilant watch on their rear, fully expecting to see militia members charging after them at any moment. "We're definitely in the right area. These boys left a trail of dead," Brett's observed grimly. Wade nodded. "Let's follow the bodies, then." Brett's led the duo out from behind cover. They had barely reached the street when several shots rang out from near the main road. Both soldiers immediately turned and opened fire, despite not having a clear target in sight, only wanting to buy themselves enough time to spot their attackers. "Top of the truck," Brett's called out. Wade immediately adjusted his aim, firing several rounds toward the top of their broken-down truck. The bullets struck the side, narrowly missing the shooter but forcing him to duck. Brett's, meanwhile, honed in on two men who had taken up a position behind some trees in the front yard of the corner house. He concentrated his fire on the area, hoping to pin them down and allow the zombies to their rear to catch up. "Let's move," Brett shouted, continuing to fire as Wade darted around him, taking cover behind a tree. Wade quickly dropped his assault rifle to the ground, unslinging his sniper rifle. Dropping to one knee, he aimed at the legs of the closest militiaman. With a single shot, the man's knee exploded in a display of bone and crimson. The militiaman dropped to the ground, screaming in agony. Wade, still staring through his scope, aimed for the other gunman, who was visibly contemplating his next move. Wade yelled out as loud as he could, "Drop your gun and get your man. If you are unarmed, I'm not going to fire." The militiaman hesitated for a brief moment before cursing under his breath. Wade watched as the man slung the rifle over his shoulder and showed Wade his empty hands. "Go get him," Wade ordered. The man ran out from behind cover, reaching his wounded friend and helping him up as the zombies continued to close the gap. The two militiamen moved as fast as they could toward the house, slipping inside and slamming the door just as the mob reached them. "We're clear. Let's move," Wade called out. The two soldiers darted from cover, racing to the alleyway between the next two houses. They stopped in the backyards to get their bearings. "That was nice of you to let them live," Brett remarked. Wade shrugged. "I figured they don't want to be out here any more than we do, and they'll pick survival." "And if they hadn't?" Brett asked. Wade's voice was cold. "Then they'd be zombie chow by now." Brett let out a chuckle as they surveyed the backyards, spotting a few creatures wandering aimlessly, some trapped by chain-link fences, others free roaming. "Look, down at the next block," Wade said, pointing. Brett followed his gaze to where three black SUVs were lined up on the side of the street. Either someone was having a pre-apocalypse party for some feds. "Or we found our ride," Wade finished, nodding. The two of them exchanged a look before breaking from cover, moving swiftly through the yards with Wade taking point. As they approached one of the shambling zombies, Wade dispatched it with a swift knife strike. The soldiers continued moving cautiously toward the SUVs, stopping a few yards away and taking up a defensive position beside a house. They both aimed their rifles at the vehicles, expecting to see a guard, but there was nothing except for a couple of corpses on the ground nearby. "What do you think?" Brett asked. Wade was thoughtful. "I think if I was guarding those, I wouldn't be doing it out in the open." "The house in front of it?" Brett suggested. "I'd move a little further back, but I'm a better shot than anybody they got," Wade said with a smirk. Brett chuckled at his comrade's bravado, giving him a pat on the back as they moved down the yards. It took a few moments before they found themselves outside the target house. Brett slung his rifle over his shoulder, drawing his handgun before reaching for the patio door. With a slight push, it slid open silently. The two men stepped into the kitchen, both on high alert as they moved through the space. Before they could reach the swinging door separating the kitchen from the living room, they heard a man cough in the next room. Brett gave Wade a series of hand signals, indicating for him to go high while he went low. The sniper nodded, and Brett took a knee, gently pushing the swinging door open to give them both a clear shot. As the room came into view, they spotted a lone militiaman, no more than 19, staring out the front window with a rifle in his lap. The kid was clearly on edge, probably due to the gunfire outside. "Okay, kid, be cool," Brett said. The young man nearly fell over from shock, fumbling for his weapon. But as soon as he saw the two soldiers aiming at him, he let the rifle fall to the ground. "Please don't shoot. Please don't shoot," the kid begged, his hands shooting up in surrender. Wade's tone was calm but firm. "Relax, kid. As long as you don't do anything stupid, we're not going to hurt you." Okay, what do you want me to do?" the kid asked, his voice shaking. "Do you have the keys for those cars outside?" Brett asked. The kid shook his head frantically. "No, I don't. But they're in the cup holder." Brett gave a small nod. "That sounds like the right answer to me. Just take it and go." I swear I won't do anything, the kid pleaded. Brett looked over at Wade. What do you think, Wade? Does he look like a man of his word? Wade gave the frightened kid a once-over before shaking his head. I'm not entirely sold, but I know a way we can make sure. The kid's eyes widened in fear, clearly expecting the worst. Wade, however, motioned for the kid to walk down the hall. Get moving. Find the bathroom and get in there, but keep your hands high, Wade instructed. Yes, sir. Yes, sir, the kid stammered, moving shakily but quickly down the hall. He found the bathroom and stepped in, all the while keeping his hands above his head. He stood there, staring at the two soldiers, too terrified to make a move. Wade's tone was firm as he spoke. Okay, kid, if you want to live, you need to do one thing for me. Absolutely, whatever it is, I'll do it, the kid promised. Sit there and count to 1,000. Once you're done counting, you can come out. If you come out sooner. Wade's voice trailed off, the threat unspoken but clear. Brett's finished the sentence, his tone cold. It'll be the last thing you ever do. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. 1, 2, 3. The kid started counting immediately as Brett shut the bathroom door. The two soldiers walked back into the living room. Brett popped the magazine out of the kid's rifle, tossing it aside but leaving the weapon itself. You almost have to feel sorry for the kid, Brett said, shaking his head. Barely out of diapers and on the front line of a war. Same thing happened to me, Wade replied. Yeah, and look how well you turned out. Brett shot back, his sarcasm cutting through the tension. Wade chuckled, the hardened sniper amused by the banter. Come on, let's go get our friends. Chapter 8. Captain Kersey had heard his two soldiers escape through the back of the house. He began a silent countdown in his head before unleashing hell on the militia across the street. 3, 2, 1, he whispered to himself. Kersey popped up from behind cover, shoving the front of his rifle out of the shattered window and opening fire. In the span of a few seconds, he sent nearly a dozen rounds toward the houses across the street. He didn't have a specific target, rather, he focused his fire on the windows, hoping that one of the militia inside would catch a stray. A few seconds into his barrage, the three houses across the street illuminated with muzzle flashes, forcing the captain back down behind cover. Bullets ripped through the windows and the front of the house as Kersey combat crawled through the living room and back toward the kitchen. Even though he knew he wouldn't hit anything, Kersey popped up and fired a few more shots through the windows before ducking back down for cover. He knew that the bullets would be well spent if they bought his men more time. This only antagonized the militia across the street, who peppered the house with more bullets. Kersey got flat on the ground, positioning himself in front of the refrigerator. While it wasn't perfect protection, it was close. So now what in the hell are you going to do, Kersey? He muttered to himself, trying to form a plan out of nothing. As the bullets continued to fly, he knew he had to move. They're going to flank you, get moving, he ordered himself, forcing his body to respond. Kersey willed himself to move, sliding on the kitchen floor toward the patio door. As he reached it, he noticed that the gunfire coming from the front of the house had died down a bit, as if several of the gunmen had stopped firing. Damn it, he cursed, knowing what that likely meant. The militia was on the move. He put his head down and ran away from the main street, picking up as much speed as he could before reaching the gap between the two houses. As he sprinted across it, he spotted 3 militia members in the street with their weapons raised toward the house. It took them a split second to notice him running and adjust their aim, which was why their bullets found nothing but air. Kersey managed to get across to the next house, stopping quickly at the corner to turn and fire several rounds in their direction. While he missed, it was enough to force the trio of militia to scatter for cover. The captain turned toward the street behind him, pumping his legs hard across the yard. Just before reaching the corner of the next house, more shots rang out from the opposite side of the house where he had started. The bullets smacked into the bricks, several chunks hitting his arm as he sprinted by. Kersey kept running to the next street, continuing to sprint forward since he didn't have the luxury of stopping and getting the lay of the land. His momentum carried him right into a pack of zombies a dozen thick. "Oh shit," he exclaimed, doing the only thing he could, lowering his shoulder and plowing through them with as much power as he could muster. The first creature he came into contact with heard his approach, turning just in time to receive Kersey's shoulder into its gut. The captain wrapped his free arm around the ghoul, lifting it ever so slightly off the ground and plowing forward with it. The added weight allowed him to push through the rest of them, but it also caused him to go off balance, and the two of them crashed to the ground shortly after clearing the mob. The fallen ghoul thrashed about, trying to grab at Kersey, who was flailing himself in an attempt to get away from the creature. With a well-placed kick to the midsection, the captain managed to separate the two of them, but his troubles were far from over. Just a few yards away stood the mob he had just pushed through, several of them still standing and coming his way with excited moans in their throats. His first instinct was to open fire, but he thought better of it. Move, 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 he urged himself, scrambling back to his feet just as the gunfire sprang to life behind him. The bullets ripped through several of the creatures, the noise and bullet strikes attracting their attention and buying Kersey precious seconds to put some distance between him and the militia. As he reached the next house, more bullets tore through the air, striking the ground right by his feet. He took up a defensive position at the corner of the house, turning to return fire. Kersey got the second group in his sights, pausing briefly when he recognized the man leading the charge. "What in the hell are you doing here, Wayne?" Kersey's mind raced for a split second, 1,000 different thoughts slamming into one another at the sight of Wayne, who was the highest-ranking militia member they had been in contact with. The last time their paths had crossed, Wayne was a terrifying presence, providing photographic evidence of what he had done to Ted Harris, the misbehaving leader of the Chosen. Despite the demeaning punishment, Wayne was firmly in control and almost seemed reasonable. While 1,000 thoughts were competing for Kersey's attention, the one that stood out was a straightforward one. If Wayne was leading the charge, then whatever was in that warehouse was worth killing every single one of them over. As that split second of chaotic contemplation ended, Kersey aimed just to the side of Wayne, squeezing off a couple of shots, one of which hit the militiaman in the chest protector. Rather than return fire, Wayne stared over at Kersey, as if he were making eye contact, though his aviator sunglasses made confirming that impossible. Wayne got a psychotic-looking smile on his face before giving Kersey a playful wave. The strange moment lasted a couple of seconds before the gunfire resumed from his men. Kersey fired a couple of retaliatory shots toward the group that was clearing out the zombie mob before turning and running. He darted in front of the next house for cover, looking across the street to find a large manicured field that led right up to the Mammoth School, easily 300 yards of no cover, staring the captain in the face. "This is going to suck," Kersey muttered to himself, picking up the pace and sprinting as hard as he possibly could across the street and into the field, not daring to look back until he was halfway across. What he spotted confused him to no end. "What in the hell?" he whispered, continuing to run while his focus was firmly on the half-dozen militia to his rear. Rather than continuing the pursuit, he could see that they were standing together, as if they were talking. Despite the distance, he could see that Wayne was extremely upset about something. A moment later, 3 of the men took off running toward the original ambush point. Kersey slowed down, a smile creeping across his face. "Good job, boys. I'm guessing you borrowed one of their vehicles," he chuckled, continuing his run up to the school. He finally arrived and looked in through the window of a classroom, relieved to find it empty. Within seconds, the butt of his rifle was through the glass, and he was climbing through. Kersey collapsed onto the ground, taking a moment to catch his breath before pulling himself up and making a run for the door. As he reached it, he stopped himself from opening it, spotting movement outside. Kersey muttered expletives under his breath as he drew his knife. With a single move, he threw open the door, darted out into the hallway, and delivered a kill strike to the side of the zombie's head. As the creature fell to the ground, he heard moaning coming from all sides. His head was on a swivel as he looked up and down the hallway, spotting dozens of zombies shambling about. "Oh great, it looks like the whole town turned out," he muttered, looking frantically for an escape. He spotted a sign for the stairs 20 yards away and immediately broke into a sprint, staying low to make it harder for the zombies to grasp him. The darkness in the hallway helped cover his movement, allowing him to get into the stairwell. Several creatures moaned with excitement from the next landing as they began shambling toward him. As the ghouls stumbled down the stairs, he dodged them on his way up to the second floor. Kersey contemplated going to the top floor, but the dozen zombies on the next landing convinced him that the second floor was good enough. He ripped open the door to the second floor, relieved to see that there was only a smattering of zombies up there, and most of them hadn't taken notice of him yet, allowing him to slip into the first classroom virtually unnoticed. Kersey rushed over to the window, staying out of sight while looking out toward the field he had just sprinted across. "What in the hell are you doing, Wayne?" he muttered under his breath, watching as Wayne strolled across the field with two militiamen flanking him, one of the men carrying a large canvas bag on his back. The trio of men stopped 30 yards from the building. "Good afternoon, Captain Kersey." Wayne called out, "It is so good to see you again, my friend, even if you are shooting up my men. Now don't worry, I'm not mad. Things got a little crazy, and that's what happens these days. Bullets start flying. Now, what is a little out of the ordinary is that some of your boys decided to take one of my shiny black SUVs out for a joyride. Now, from one parent of rambunctious boys to another, can I get your word that when they bring that back, they'll wash it first?" Kersey cracked half a smile as Wayne continued. "Now, I totally understand your reluctance on answering me, seeing as how we were just shooting at you and all that fun stuff. But I hope that you can hear me, because this next bit really needs hearing." Wayne looked over to the man with the canvas bag, motioning for him to pull something out. A few seconds later, Kersey watched in horror as the militiaman pulled out a rocket launcher. "As much as I like you, Captain Kersey, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart, I do like you, I'm afraid our friendship is at an impasse. The warehouse a mile or so away from us, I'm afraid my orders are to take it by any means necessary. Which means I'm going to have to come in there and get you." Wayne put the rocket launcher on his shoulder, taking aim and squeezing the trigger. Kersey dove away from the window for cover just before the rocket slammed into the side of the building. A deafening boom echoed through the air as a giant fireball stretched into the sky, thick black smoke coming along for the ride. As the carnage cleared, Wayne looked upon a giant hole in the side of the building, big enough for all three of them to walk through. "Ready or not, Captain, here I come. The end."